Let's unpack this and more with Transnet's Bonginkosi Mabaso, who joins us this evening. Thank you very much, as always, for your time. And maybe let's start with those views from ARIA saying that Transnet is too restrictive in its regulatory framework, and the company is stubborn in allowing investors to come on board. And that's probably why we saw only 2 private companies wanting to come on board with those slots. What is your stance, or rather your opinion, on those thoughts that were expressed by ARIA?
Thank you, and a good evening to you, Rofia, and your viewers. First of all, I think one needs to qualify that what you are seeing happening and what we've put out there is not the implementation of the white paper, which government is still working on finalizing, but rather a proactive approach by Transnet to say, let's move ahead of the white paper and therefore pilot the implementation of slot sales and introduction of third-party players in the rail space. So, given that, and as highlighted, this being a pilot requires that in implementing it, we implement quite strict rules in terms of qualifying criteria for those that will eventually play in the space. In doing so, and this being the first of its kind in terms of this project in the country, we therefore have to then run a process that will allow us as an organization to sort of draw lessons which we will then implement as the white paper eventually is finalized and implemented. Similarly, providing the private sector with an opportunity to also sort of look into this process and learn from it as well, so that they are prepared at the time that we implement the white paper. So when the notion that our requirements are quite strict, if you unpack them in detail, you realize that there isn't really anything that is very strict in relation to them, because the requirements are very basic. We look for a service provider, or rather a train operating company that has the resources or that has access to the resources that will be able to execute the service, rather than signing up with entities that will, over time, then start the process of soliciting the resources post the award. So our approach is not really as stringent as the body that has just spoken now has shared.
Yeah, and we'll get a little bit more detail on the criteria in a moment, but I just want to engage you. If you're saying that the white paper is yet to be completed and this was actually a pilot project that you have put out into the market, does it not concern you that the appetite was so little, in that there were 16 private entities that had expressed interest initially, and only 2 private companies, one which I have yet to name, have ended up in the first phase of this project?
Yeah, it doesn't concern us at all. First of all, let me just qualify that it's not 16, it's 19 entities that expressed interest. And out of the 19, we've landed with the 2 that were successful in their bid. The reason why I say it's not a cause for concern is the fact that, as I said, this was a pilot that we are, of course, rolling out. And as a pilot, there will, of course, be some skepticism from the private sector as well in terms of participation, but over time, as it crystallizes and in our implementation, you will find that more and more players will raise their hands for purposes of participation.
Thanks for that correction. I was actually thinking about the 16 slots that you had allocated, so thanks for that. Let's go back to that issue of criteria, and you did mention that a company that wants to come on board needs to have the actual resources to be able to operate on those lines. What are some of the other criteria, and if this is the voice that is being shared by businesses across the board in terms of that criteria being strict, would you be willing to loosen the strings a little bit to allow for more players to come and play various roles within those slots on the rail network?
Rofewa, so the criteria, and the most critical one at that, is that the player needs to have access to rolling stock. And when we say access to rolling stock, we do not necessarily mean ownership of rolling stock. I do take note of the fact that the biggest outcry out there is players that are saying they can't invest in rolling stock at this stage, but we have not necessarily stipulated that one needs to invest. We've just said access to rolling stock. To that extent, we actually even offered on our end to lease out some of our wagons to any applicants that may want to raise their hands. That was publicly made available. And we do also note, and we are aware that there are third parties that offer leased locomotives, which then eliminates outright that outcry of players saying they do not have access to rolling stock. That is the biggest one in reality that has caused an outcry. And we really believe that we have not been stringent in applying our principles, because at the end of the day, whoever has access to these slots need to be able to use them productively, and you do need the rolling stock in order to do so.
And then finally, and this is a little bit off topic, but just an update on issues around copper theft and some of the immediate actions that you guys have embarked on as TRF in the meantime to curb the copper theft as much as possible.
Thanks, Rufiwa. So we've really extended ourselves in applying our minds in how we deal with the cable theft incidents. One of the initiatives that we are running, and quite aggressively so, is we are changing our procurement process to solicit service providers that are assisting us to cut the lines. Instead of a standard security contract, we now work on the basis of an outcome-based contracting regime where the service providers will be paid on the basis of the results that they deliver on the line. To that extent, we've seen quite a significant improvement in the actual stats. Just take, for example, if you compare this year, by half year end this year, we had achieved 1,300 arrests compared to last year for the full 12 months where we had achieved 1,500 arrests. The actual number of incidents have come down by 20% compared to last year, year on year. And for that reason, we are seeing that we are fighting a winning battle. And of course, a special thanks to law enforcement as well, in that they have supported us quite aggressively.
Bonginkosi, as always, thank you very much for your time this evening. That's Transnet Bonginkosi Mabaso. And just some context on that last question, there is set to be a briefing by the Ministries of Transport and DPE tomorrow around issues that include cable theft at our SOEs, including Transnet. Thank you very much for your time.